You'll have a lien on your truck by Friday.
The first thing I noticed when I pulled my Ford F-250 up the winding gravel driveway of my estate wasn't the towering red pines or the way the late afternoon sun hit the solar glass facade of the eco-mansion my grandfather and I had built. It was the smell. Lavender. Strong, synthetic, and completely out of place in a forest of red cedar and damp earth. I killed the engine, let the truck coast to a stop, and sat there for a long minute with my hands resting on the steering wheel. I am a quiet man, 54 years old, with the kind of posture you only get from 22 years as a state smart grid chief engineer and a prior career as an Army Corps of Engineers officer. I don't move fast when I'm being watched, and I don't raise my voice when I'm angry. But looking through my windshield at my own front porch, I felt a cold, specific kind of clarity settle behind my ribs. My smart lock gate was gone. In its place stood an ornate wrought iron monstrosity with a brass keypad. Spread across my manicured front lawn were dozens of matching white yoga mats. A citronella candle flickered on a side table next to a stack of brochures. And standing on my porch wearing a silk robe that had belonged to my late wife was Victoria Sterling. She had a clipboard in her hand, her sunglasses pushed up on a tight, expensive gray bob, and she was gesturing warmly toward a group of wealthy-looking people who were sipping green juice from plastic cups. On my lawn, on soil my grandfather had cleared with a second-hand tractor in 1973. I stepped down from the cab of my truck. My boots crunched on the gravel, a sound that carried clearly across the quiet valley. The conversations on the lawn died out in layers. First the adults nearest the driveway, then the teenagers holding their phones, and finally Victoria herself. She turned, her smile sliding off her face for a fraction of a second before hardening into a mask of pure rehearsed authority. "Can I help you, sir?" She called out, her voice carrying that sharp, caring pitch of someone who has spent a decade chairing board meetings and expecting everyone to fall into line. "This is a private community event. If you're looking for the municipal road, you've turned down the wrong lane." I walked slowly toward the porch. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't yell. "I'm not lost, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice level and conversational. "I live here. This is my house." She laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound, pitched perfectly for her audience on the lawn. "I think there's been a massive misunderstanding," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "This is the Sterling Wellness Retreat. The Whispering Pines HOA acquired this property under the Community Preservation and Abandonment Clause 3 weeks ago. I have a notarized lease on my clipboard right now, signed by the owner's estate." She stepped to the edge of the porch, looking down at me as if I were a contractor who had showed up at the wrong door. "If you don't leave this property immediately, I'm going to call the sheriff. We don't tolerate vagrancy or trespassing in Whispering Pines." I looked at her. I looked at the clipboard. I looked at the young deputy's patrol cruiser that had just pulled up to the curb behind my truck, summoned by a silent alarm or a neighbor's call. The deputy who stepped out was young, late 20s, with his body cam clipped to his chest and his hand resting habitually near his belt. His name tag read, Reyes. He walked up the driveway, looking between me, Victoria, and the yoga mats on the lawn. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Reyes asked. "Yes, officer," Victoria said, her voice instantly shifting into a rehearsed flutter of concern. "This man just drove up our private road, walked onto our retreat grounds, and is claiming he owns the property. I have our HOA lease and the county-approved annexation files right here. He's trespassing, and I want him removed." Reyes looked at me. "Sir, do you have some identification?" I pulled out my wallet, took out my driver's license, and handed it to him. "My name is Marcus Vance. I've owned this property for 11 years since my grandfather passed. I've been on a state utility deployment overseas for the last 15 months. I returned 3 weeks early." Reyes checked the license, then looked up at the house. "Ma'am, does the name Marcus Vance appear on your lease?" "Of course not," Victoria said, her chin lifting. "The lease was executed by the legal representative of the Vance Family Trust, a man named Donald Vance, who confirmed the property had been abandoned. This man is a fraud. He's been mailing himself documents to this address to set up a residency scam. Officers, I've had people removed from this mountain before. We have standards here, and I expect you to enforce them." Reyes looked back at me, his face careful neutral. "Mr. Vance, she's got a notarized lease on her clipboard. In this state, a notarized lease is a civil presumption of occupancy. I can't adjudicate a property title dispute at the curb. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises tonight and resolve this in civil court tomorrow morning." I sat with that for 3 seconds. In 28 years of engineering, I'd learned that when someone is busy digging a hole, you don't grab the shovel from their hands. You let them dig. "I understand, Deputy Reyes," I said quietly. I will leave voluntarily under protest. But before I go, I'd like you to log 3 things in your incident report tonight. First, that I am the sole legal owner of this parcel, and I am leaving under the threat of arrest. Second, that the document Mrs. Sterling is holding is a forgery. And third, please note for the record that she has stated on your body cam that the Whispering Pines HOA claims exclusive jurisdiction over this structure. Victoria smirked, waving her hand dismissively. Log whatever you want, sweetheart. You'll have a lien on your truck by Friday if you come back here. I didn't answer. I walked back to my F-250, put my suitcase on the passenger seat, and climbed in. As I backed down the driveway, I looked up at the second-floor window of my study. The light was on. Through the solar glass, I could see a second figure, a man in a polo shirt standing near my desk. He was feeding sheets of paper into a small mechanical shredder. My paper. My grandfather's engineering files. My late wife's journals. I drove down the mountain road in silence. The Whispering Pines gate rolled closed behind me, its white-painted bars reflecting my headlights. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a text from Maya, my paralegal of 9 years. I'm at my desk, the text read. Tell me what we're dealing with. I pulled over on the shoulder of the county highway, stared at the glowing screen, and typed back 2 words: the trap. I checked into a Hilton on the south end of town, a sterile room with 2 queen beds I didn't need and a desk built for nothing more strenuous than expense reports. I hung up my suit, made a cup of bad coffee in the desk machine, and opened my laptop. It was midnight, but in my line of work, the clock doesn't start until the paperwork is laid out. To understand why Victoria Sterling believed she could take my house, you have to understand the geography of this mountain. Whispering Pines was built in 2009, 96 luxury homes carved into the higher ridges of the valley. It was a gated enclave marketed as exclusive mountain living. For 14 years, the HOA had operated like a quiet, high-end bureaucracy, collecting dues and maintaining the private roads. Then 3 years ago, Victoria was elected president. She ran on a platform of community modernizing, which was a polite way of saying she wanted to turn the mountain into her personal fiefdom. Under her tenure, the HOA's fine revenue had tripled. The newsletters went from notices about lost retrievers to multi-page lists of aesthetic violations. A non-conforming mailbox was a $600 fine. A driveway with tire marks was a lien. I'd watched it happen from my ridge. My 15-acre parcel, known on the county plat as the Vance Sanctuary, sat directly at the throat of the valley bordering the HOA's eastern line. Because my grandfather had built our house in 1978, 30 years before the subdivision existed. We were never part of the HOA. We didn't pay their dues, we didn't follow their rules, and we didn't answer their letters. To Victoria, my eco-mansion built of local red cedar and smart glass, sitting on 15 acres of pristine forest, was an eyesore, because it was a reminder of an authority she couldn't reach. It was the one piece of the mountain she didn't control. And then I deployed. I spent 15 months in Singapore and Dubai consulting on large-scale smart grid retrofits for the state utility department. My house sat empty. My taxes were paid quarterly via autodraft from my military pension account. My name sat on the original deed record at the county assessor's office undisturbed. Or so I thought. Daniel Maya's voice came through my laptop speaker. I ran the name on her lease. Donald Vance. There is no Donald Vance associated with your family trust. The trust has only one trustee, you. The notary stamp on that lease belongs to a woman named Brenda Higgins. I checked her registration. Her notary commission was revoked by the state 14 months ago for signing off on fraudulent title transfers in the Western County. The signature is a forgery, I said, leaning back against the hotel pillows. What about the annexation filing? She filed it under an emergency community stewardship ordinance from 1994. Maya said, her keyboard clicking in the background. It allows an HOA to temporarily manage adjacent properties deemed abandoned or in active foreclosure to prevent wildfire hazards. It's a procedural trick, Marcus. She filed the notice, mailed the warning letters to an old address she knew was inactive, waited 30 days, and then filed a quiet title petition claiming no response was received. She didn't expect you back for another 3 months. She didn't expect me to keep a redundant cellular backup system either, I said. 3 years ago, after a string of burglaries in the valley, I'd installed a high-definition off-grid security system. It ran on solar panels, an independent cellular uplink, completely separate from the house's main Wi-Fi. If the power went out, if the Wi-Fi died, the cameras kept running. I logged into the server. The interface was raw data, but the footage was clear. I scrolled back 14 days to the morning of the break-in. At 8:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, Victoria's white SUV had pulled up to my gate. She got out wearing her embroidered HOA polo accompanied by a locksmith in a reliable local van. The locksmith took 11 minutes to drill my smart lock hand, the new keys to Victoria, and collect a stack of cash. I watched her count out $340 in bills, handing them to a man who didn't ask for a deed because she had a clipboard and an HOA lanyard. "Save that clip, Maya," I said. "And the one from tonight. I want the locksmith's invoice, the U-Haul truck that arrived 3 hours later, and every second of Victoria moving my late wife's things into my storage shed. Especially the part where she waved at the camera she thought was disabled." "Already saved," Maya said. "What about the second figure, the man at the shredder?" I recognized his polo, I said. It was the same local smart home installer who did the HOA's clubhouse upgrades last year. He didn't just change my lock. He was resetting the smart grid integration system my grandfather and I designed for the house. He was trying to link my solar array directly to the HOA's clubhouse grid. "Why?" Maya asked. "Because the clubhouse is running a $3,000 monthly deficit on their heating bill," I said. "And my eco-mansion produces enough surplus solar energy to power half the ridge." She wasn't just squatting, Maya. She was stealing the power. The next morning, I didn't go to court. I didn't file an emergency motion. Instead, I drove to a diner 3 miles outside the subdivision boundary to meet a man named Henry Ellis. Henry was 78, a retired Marine who had lived in Whispering Pines since 2009. He sat in a corner booth wearing his old service cap and nursing a cup of black coffee. He had an accordion folder on the seat beside him, thick enough that the cardboard had started to split at the corners. "I heard she put a yellow notice on your door, Marcus," Henry said as I sat down. "She's been telling people at the mailbox cluster that you're a land grab speculator trying to seize the common areas." "She can say what she wants, Henry," I said. "The county assessor's office has a different story. What do you have in the folder?" He slid the folder across the table. 5 years of her paperwork. I kept every single notice she sent my wife Margie before she passed. Margie had a bird bath in the side yard. It was 3 inches over the aesthetic height limit. Victoria fined us $600, threatened a lien, and told Margie she'd have the sheriff out here if we didn't comply. Margie was terrified of her Marcus. She paid it. We all did. I opened the folder. It was a paper trail of a machine working exactly as designed. Fines for the wrong shade of mulch. Fines for a garden hose left coiled on the porch. Fines for parking a medical transport vehicle in a driveway for more than 45 minutes. Underneath the notices sat the HOA's financial reports. I am a civil engineer. I read balance sheets the way other people read roadmaps. It took me 4 minutes to spot the gap. "The board discretionary fund," I said, pointing to a line item. $4,100 a month paid to a company called Sterling Wellness LLC. "Who owns that company, Henry?" "Her sister-in-law," Henry said, his jaw tightening. "They registered it in another county. None of the homeowners knew about it. We thought the money was going toward the road maintenance. But look at the asphalt out there, Marcus. It hasn't been sealed since 2018. "She's been using the fines to fund her sister-in-law's LLC, I said. "And she was planning to use my mansion as the physical headquarters for the retreat to make the business look legitimate before the annual audit." "Can you stop her?" Henry asked, looking at me with the quiet, tired hope of a man who had spent 3 years believing he was completely alone on this mountain. "I don't need to stop her, Henry," I said. "She's already stopped. She just hasn't hit the brakes yet." I spent the next 48 hours at my laptop in the Hilton building the file. I didn't call a lawyer. I called the State Utility Commission, the County GIS Mapping Department, and the Regional Director of the State Smart Grid Authority. In my profession, you don't argue with a bully about who owns the fence. You pull the master plat and look at where the transformer is buried. And that was when I found the second gap, the big one. My grandfather, Silas Vance, had bought our 15 acres in 1973. It was a clean, unencumbered deed recorded at the Mon County Clerk's Office under parcel ID 178-071. When the developers of Whispering Pines broke ground in 2008, they platted 96 lots under parcel ID 178017. To save money on development costs, the developer had reached a verbal agreement with my grandfather they would run the subdivision's main access road, the only road leading in or out of Whispering Pines across a 60-foot strip of our eastern boundary. In exchange, my grandfather was granted a permanent utility easement to tap into the valley's primary power line. But verbal agreements don't run with the land. In 1992, my grandfather had formalized the arrangement in a written revocable license agreement. It was filed in Book 44, page 2 and 18 of the county recorder's office. I pulled the document. It was 12 pages of clean manual typewriter text with a notary stamp faded to the color of old lavender. I read paragraph 4 twice. This license is personal to the licensee named herein, Hollister and Sons Developers, and does not run with the land transfer to successor entities or create any permanent easement or right-of-way. Any assertion of adverse interest jurisdiction or claim of ownership by the licensee or any successor entity over any portion of the licensor's parcel shall result in the immediate automatic termination of this license without further notice. The Whispering Pines HOA was a successor entity, and Victoria Sterling, acting as president of that HOA, had just filed a fraudulent lease claiming ownership of my parcel. She had just asserted an adverse interest on the public record. She had just triggered the kill switch on her own neighborhood's road. But that wasn't the only thing sitting on my land. In 2011, when the subdivision was expanding its second phase, the utility company had installed a high-capacity smart grid transformer vault. It was a massive weathered green metal box, half-screened by the cedar hedges at the edge of my driveway. It delivered electricity to every single one of the 96 homes in Whispering Pines, including the clubhouse. And according to the county GIS map, that transformer vault sat exactly 42 inches inside my property line. I stared at the screen, my coffee going completely cold. Victoria Sterling believed she was running a gated community of 96 luxury homes. She believed she could use her clipboard and her 911 calls to drive a black man out of his own house. She had no idea that the road her residents drove on every morning and the power that heated their pools every night legally existed at my sole discretion. The grand opening of the Sterling Wellness Retreat was scheduled for Saturday at noon. I spent Friday afternoon with Deputy Reyes at the Mon County Sheriff's Department. I didn't bring an attorney. I brought my laptop, the 1992 license agreement, the 1973 deed, the county tax assessor's certified records, and 26 months of security camera footage. Reyes sat in a small interview room, his hands folded on the table as we went through the files. He watched the locksmith drill my door. He watched Victoria count out the $340. He watched her son Brent carry my wife's framed photographs to the storage shed. "She told me you were a squatter, Mr. Vance," Reyes said, his voice flat. "She had a notarized lease." "The notary was revoked 14 months ago, Deputy," I said, sliding the State Commission report across the table. "And the signature on that lease is a forgery. My wife died 4 years ago. I'm the only name on the trust." Reyes looked at the documents, then at his partner, a senior sergeant who had walked in 10 minutes earlier and had been standing near the wall with his arms crossed. "This is burglary, Sergeant," Reyes said. "Unlawful entry, forgery of a legal instrument in filing a false police report." The sergeant nodded slowly. "We've had 6 complaints from Whispering Pines residents about that woman over the last 2 years. Every time her lawyer filed an administrative delay and the county attorney told us it was a civil matter. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is a felony on camera." "She's hosting a grand opening tomorrow at noon," I said. "There will be 80 people on my lawn. I want you there, Deputy Reyes, but I don't want you to arrest her at the gate. I want you to wait until she's at the microphone." The sergeant looked at me, a small knowing smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. "You're a very patient man, Mr. Vance." "I'm an engineer, Sergeant," I said. "We don't build bridges with anger. We build them with gravity." Saturday morning came in cold and clear. The kind of autumn morning where the pine needles are covered in frost and the air smells like wood smoke. By 11:30 a.m., my estate looked like a lifestyle magazine spread. 2 refrigerated catering vans were parked along the gravel driveway. A white canvas canopy had been erected on my lawn where 3 servers in black aprons were arranging plates of organic fruit and smoked salmon. A live harpist was playing near the cedar hedge. I parked my truck 3 blocks away outside the HOA gate and walked up the mountain path on foot. I wore my old canvas work jacket, my boots, and a pair of worn work gloves. I carried a black leather briefcase that had belonged to my father. It contained the deed, the lease, the utility filings, and a single state-certified smart grid override tablet. I reached the edge of my property line at 11:55 a.m. The lawn was packed. I counted 43 vehicles parked along the road, their luxury bumpers overlapping my pasture grass. Victoria was at the center of the crowd, wearing a cream blazer and her pearl earrings, holding a glass of champagne. Her son Brent was filming her with his phone, narrating for the HOA's social media page. "A vision of community wellness," her voice carried over the harp music. Whispering Pines is moving forward, reclaiming abandoned spaces and turning them into resources that benefit every resident. I walked through the side gate past the catering vans. Nobody stopped me. In their eyes, a black man in a work jacket on a Saturday morning was either a landscaper or a server. I walked directly to the green transformer vault, half-screened by the cedar hedges near my driveway. I opened my briefcase, pulled out my state utility key, the one I carried as chief engineer, and unlocked the vault door. Inside, the digital control panel blinked green, steady, and confident. I plugged my state tablet into the diagnostics port. The interface loaded in 3 seconds, displaying the smart grid routing schedule for Whispering Pines. All 96 homes, the clubhouse, and my mansion were mapped in red and blue lines. I set the timer for exactly 12:02 p.m. At 12:00 sharp, Victoria stepped onto my front porch. She tapped the microphone, the PA system humming through 2 large speakers mounted on my porch railing. The crowd on the lawn turned toward her, glasses raised, smiling. "Friends and neighbors," Victoria's voice boomed across the valley. "Welcome to the grand opening of the Sterling Wellness Center. Today we prove that our community standards are stronger than any individual's neglect. We have cleared the eyesores, we have secured the title, and we have established a sanctuary of wellness that will elevate Whispering Pines for decades to come." She lifted her scissors, poised them over a red ribbon stretched between my porch posts, and smiled for her son's camera. "To our community," she said, "to our future." The crowd applauded. At 12:02, the timer hit 0. I tapped the screen on my tablet, executing a manual load shedding command under State Utility Code Section 11404. The transformer inside the vault groaned, a low concussive rumble that vibrated through my boots. Then the hum died. Instantly, the PA system went dead. The microphone screeched once, a sharp, dying feedback whine, and went silent. The harpist stopped playing as the electric amplifier behind her clicked off. But it wasn't just the porch. Down the block, the electric gates of Whispering Pines swung loose as their backup batteries kicked in. In 96 homes across the ridge, the air conditioning stopped. The pool pumps died. The security panels began to beep in low synchronized intervals as they switched to emergency reserve power. The silence that settled over my lawn was complete. It wasn't the quiet of a pause. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness of 80 people trying to figure out why the world had just turned off. Victoria blinked, tapping the microphone with her manicured finger. Is the generator on, Brent? Check the breaker." "The breaker is fine, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent yard as I walked out from behind the cedar hedges. The crowd parted. 80 heads turned as I walked up the gravel path, holding my father's leather briefcase. Victoria's eyes found me, her jaw tightening. "You," she said, her voice dropping into a hiss. "I told you to stay off this property. Officers!" She looked toward the driveway, expecting the hired HOA security guard to step forward. Instead, Deputy Reyes and his sergeant stepped out from the shade of the red pines, their uniforms sharp, their body cams running. "Mr. Vance," Victoria said, trying to claw back her composure, "this is a private, board-approved event. You are in violation of a court-recognized lease. If you interfere with this—" "The lease is a forgery, Victoria," I said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. I opened my briefcase, took out a single county stamp manila folder, and slid the top page onto her clipboard directly over her brochures. "This is a certified copy of the deed to parcel 178-071 recorded in 1973. It's held in fee simple by the Vance Family Trust. Your lease is signed by Donald Vance, a man who doesn't exist, and notarized by a clerk whose commission was revoked 14 months ago." Victoria didn't look at the paper. "My attorneys reviewed—" "Your attorneys never saw it," I said, "because you typed it on your own computer in your dining room, paid $300 to a fraudulent notary, and filed it under an emergency ordinance that doesn't apply to agricultural land outside your subdivision." The crowd was whispering now. Henry Ellis had walked up to the front row, his arms crossed, watching Victoria with a flat, steady gaze. "But that's just the house, Victoria," I said, taking out the second document. "This is the 1992 Revocable Road License Agreement recorded in Book 44, page 218. Your neighborhood's access road. The only road in or out of this mountain runs across my property under a personal license granted to Hollister and Sons. Paragraph 4 states that any claim of adverse interest or jurisdiction by a successor entity terminates the license automatically." I looked at the 80 homeowners standing on my lawn. That means as of 12:02 p.m. today, when Mrs. Sterling recorded her fraudulent lease, the Whispering Pines HOA lost all legal right to use the road leading to your homes. You are currently trespassing on my private asphalt. A woman in the second row dropped her plastic cup. The green juice spilled into the grass, bright and useless. And the electricity. I continued, pointing to the green transformer vault. The main utility substation for this entire ridge sits 42 inches inside my lot line. The State Utility Authority has just issued an emergency suspension order under Section 11404, recognizing that the HOA has been tapping into my solar grid without a permit. I've just disconnected the main feed. I turned back to Victoria. Her face had gone the color of skim milk. Her hands were shaking so hard the champagne glass was vibrating against her wedding ring. Your retreat is closed, Victoria, I said. Your road is closed, and your neighborhood is out of power. This is ridiculous, she screamed, her voice cracking as she threw her champagne glass into the gravel. We have $3 million in development bonds. You can't just turn off a community's power. Officers, arrest this man. Reyes walked up the porch steps. He didn't look at me. He walked past me, stepped onto the porch, and stopped directly in front of Victoria. Mrs. Sterling, Reyes said, his voice carrying clearly on his body cam. You're under arrest for felony burglary, forgery of a recorded instrument, filing a false emergency report, and criminal trespass. I took the clipboard from her hands, tossed it onto the table, and pulled her arms behind her back. The sound of the Kong-Tay, that sharp metallic click, 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 was the only sound on the mountain. Brent, she shrieked, looking at her son. Film this, film them. Brent's hand was shaking so hard his phone slipped out of his fingers and landed in the dirt at Henry Ellis's feet. Henry didn't pick it up. He stepped on it, his heavy boot crushing the screen into the gravel, and looked up at Victoria. Have a nice afternoon, Victoria, Henry said. The sheriff's department had her in the back of the cruiser within 5 minutes. The 2 board members who had stood behind her on Tuesday night were taken into custody separately by the sergeant, escorted down the steps in stunned silence for their part in signing the fraudulent annexation resolution. The crowd of homeowners didn't run. They didn't shout. They stood on my lawn looking at the empty porch, then at the standard county road marker. Reyes's partner was already driving into the dirt at the gate entrance, private property, County Route 14, no HOA jurisdiction. Henry Ellis walked up to the porch holding his accordion folder. What about the road, Marcus? The road is open, Henry, I said, putting my father's deed back into the briefcase. I'm not Victoria. I don't lock people out of their homes over a mailbox post. I'll sign a permanent non-HOA easement with the residents directly on Monday. $1 a year, public access guaranteed, no dues, no fines, and no clipboard. Henry nodded once. I'll help you rebuild the gate. The settlement was signed 6 weeks later in Maya's office. The Whispering Pines HOA was formally dissolved by a 94-2 vote of the residents. A new voluntary neighborhood association was formed, chaired by Henry Ellis and Sloan Merritt, a younger resident who actually knew how to read a title abstract. The $184,000 in accumulated fines Victoria had extracted from residents over 3 years was ordered refunded in full, paid out of the HOA's frozen reserve account. The Sterling Wellness LLC was audited by the State Attorney General's Fraud Division. Victoria's sister-in-law is currently serving 42 months in a federal facility for wire fraud and conspiracy. I rebuilt the eco-mansion myself using my own crew and my grandfather's old blueprints. The front porch is red cedar, again stained to match the original wood. The solar glass catches the morning sun, reflecting the valley back at itself, clean and unobstructed. On a Saturday morning in late spring, I sat on the porch with a cup of hot coffee. The forest was quiet. The road was open, the F-250 was in the driveway, and the green transformer vault was half-screened by the cedar hedges, humming its low, steady, authorized hum. In the hallway closet behind the door hangs a small, simple black frame. Inside, under glass, is the orange owner occupancy violation notice Victoria had taped to my door on the night she called the police. Underneath it is a brass plate with a single line of text. The deed is always in the envelope. I took a sip of my coffee, looked out at the red pines, and let the quiet in.